Okay, so as you can see over here, what I'm doing is that I have my cluster with 2 nodes, right? And now what I want to do is I wanted to load, create some tables, right? Create a schema, schema in Cassandra world is a key space, tables, so it's the same word, quite easy. So over here what I did is I went to this particular directory where I have my files, and then I used the command called source, and then I pointed which SQL to run, and then what it does is it takes that script file, executes all the SQL statements in there, and voila, you have populated your cluster with sample tables, key spaces, whatever, right? Next one, Cassandra describe. It's just like SQL, which is why I said it's a double-edged sword. So you can, if you don't know what the command is, and if you're familiar with SQL, you can try and enter that command. It's most probably the same command, but sometimes it works differently. So you have like describe table name, you have describe key spaces. Well, the music DB is something that I created because it's a music database. System tracer, system, and op center come out of the box. The op center comes when you have the op center component, right? That's the management application. And then as you can see over here, I have in my music database, I have some tables like albums, and the same table album is found 3 more times. Albums by genre, albums by performer, and albums by track. So why on earth am I having 4 tables to have just 1 data albums? Why? And also same goes for performer, and performer by style. The reason why I have it is because Cassandra does not support joins. There is no such thing called joins in Cassandra. So if you want to have a search screen wherein you type the genre, I like the genre rock, for example, and then I want to find all the albums for that particular genre rock, then what Cassandra does is it goes to this particular table, albums by genre, does a list, you know, and then gets all the results. That result set is what you see. So working with Cassandra means you have to actually understand what kind of screens you will have if you have a web application, or what kind of user interface, or what kind of queries you'll have. So it is query first design. That's the term that they like to use. So you first think of your queries, and then you come to the data model. But in the relational database world, it's the other way around. You first write the data model, and then you write queries, and then you do joins to actually fit, well, the queries fit your data model. Here your data model fits the queries. That's the reverse way of looking at things. And this is one very, yes, please.
What those album by genre, others,
Mm-hmm.
that's data replicated, or just as some kind of view?
No, it's data replicated, because in Cassandra world, people like to think nowadays data is cheap, memory is cheap, so why even bother replicate data? Which means every time you write something into albums table, right, you have to write data into 1, 2, 3, 4 tables if you want to maintain consistency. But if you don't care about that particular view, I don't care, then I don't write into that table. And that responsibility goes into your hands. They made their lives easy, and your lives becomes more difficult.
Does it also mean that at some point you like album by genre and by performer, that you create a new table?
It's a new table, yeah. You create a new table, you populate the table, you maintain it, it's your responsibility.
But are there higher level tools that take out some of these words for you?
We're going to come there. And it's not elegant as you would expect in relational world, because you have to understand, you can only choose 2. Consistency here is not available out of the box. You have made a conscious decision to forego consistency in favor of availability and performance, right? Okay, let's
What is off-centering corpse?
sorry?
What is off-centering corpse?
Well, to be
Uppercase characters.
yeah,
So if I create a new key space that starts with capitals, then it will be corpse.
I'll be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that. That is something that was created by itself when I installed Op Center. So I don't go and look into why Op Center is that particular way. I like to follow the naming convention. In Cassandra world, the naming convention is, if it's one word, you use the same word, and then if you have multiple words, you just use underscores to separate the words, just like in SQL. Yeah. Yeah, precisely. So just use underscore and then separate it. I don't know why on earth they used camel casing over there. It's against the naming convention. I know it's their own product. They violated their own naming convention. Shoot them, not me. Okay, next comes, well, you have populated the tables into your key space. Next, what do you want? Data, right? You want sample data. So what I then did is that there is an interesting command called copy command. If you have data in CSV file, which is quite neat, because with CSV, you can export the data from RDBMS and export the data as a CSV file, and then you can import it into Cassandra. And the CSV file is quite neat because I was actually playing with CSV across multiple databases. Almost all database vendors nowadays support CSV. Neo4j stays same stuff. So nowadays I ask every DBA, give me a CSV export. Then I don't care which database I throw it into, but because everyone imports CSV. So here's a case where I'm importing CSV. Here's a very neat thing that you have to note. So I'm showing you the table called performer over here. And then what I'm doing over there is I'm actually identifying the columns. I also have to say, hey, is the first row containing a header, true or false, which means it'll skip the first row. And these are the columns in the file, not in the table. So I'll say this type goes to this column called type. This column country, the third column in my CSV file, goes to this property country. Then it does all that. And it imports data. And yeah, it imported 5,000 rows in 1 second. Not bad. And then I just did, after I, obviously, after you import data, you want to check if it actually did what it said. So I did a select, but I didn't want to have all the 5,000 records return. I just wanted to randomly check the first one. So I did limit 1, so it gave me 1 result. That's what you see over there. Yeah. Well, then next comes truncate table, delete, right? We're going through all the normal CRUD operations here. So I did my import. Well, obviously things didn't go well because the CSV file had some error. If the CSV file does not have proper data, then you have some kind of error over here and it stops. You don't have acidity, so you can't just roll back. That's something you have to understand. There's no rollback in Cassandra. It sucks, in my opinion. So what I did was I did an import into tracks by album table. So I did all these imports one after another just to see. And this one aborted after 388 rows. I actually had more than, what, 20,000 tracks. I was like, what, after 388 rows it stopped. So I said, okay, truncate the table. I'm going to fix the CSV file and then come back and do it. So I did a truncate table, and it's just a, you just type help and the name of the command and it'll give you the complete doc.
So if you do import some existing tables, it might be wise to first import to a temporary table.
Take a backup and then yeah, do this particular import. But normally you would do an import yeah, on an empty database, on an empty table, into an existing table. This is what I asked. I asked them guys in the community, and they said normally the use case is to import into an empty table. A lot of people don't import into an existing table. If they do, well, then they take a backup and then they do it. But there are ways to do transactions. I'm going to get there. If I don't answer that question, there's a Q&A section time. You can ask me then. Yeah, I may have skipped it. Okay, so this is the tool that we're talking about, OpCenter. As you can see, this is my local, well, my local host. I'll run it locally. I have 3 node cluster. This is my, well, this is not something, I have 3 node cluster, node 1, 2, and 3. They're all running normally. You can, and then I wanted to, you can actually go, well, this is the, because the cluster name is over here, the cluster name, this is the database name, or actually the key space name, and then inside that key space you can see what are all the tables, and then you can see, but you cannot actually view the data because the data is supposed to be massive, so they don't show you the data, but you can see what tables are in there. And obviously you can delete the table, and in the cluster actions over there on the top right corner you see, hey, add a node to the cluster. So you can do it in if you want to do it in a UI fashion, do it with a UI, or you can do it with a node tool. And that's where we come to the node tool, the next one. Well, yeah, node tool actually connects to a specific node via JMX. So you may want to note down the JMX port, not the native port. You can see several port numbers in there. So just use a JMX port. So what I did was with CCM, you can actually connect to one particular node. So what I did was, well, as I said, my nodes were numbered, they're named node 1, 2, and 3, very brilliant names. So I said CCM node 3, and then I said use the command of node tool. So for on node 3, use a node tool status, and then it gave me all this data about that particular node. And then there's another command called info command, and another command called ring command. It actually gives me the same kind of information, but just presented differently because it's targeted for a different audience. Yeah. And comes the next one called stress test, Cassandra stress. What it does is it actually, out of the box, it checks if your configuration is correct, if your configuration is sustainable in terms of the load that you're expecting. So when I run the stress test to run some benchmark, so what I've done over here is I went to the bin directory, and then I used the stress test. But again, note down that this is under the tools directory, it's not under the bin. So under the tools directory, I said, well, write about 500,000, so I said send about 500,000 write requests on node 3, and using now don't use a native protocol, use a thrift protocol, use that particular port, and then use 8 threads that will simultaneously put 500,000 requests. So I wrote this test, and then you see, well, this is statistics, and you can see operations per second, partition keys per second, rows per second, blah blah blah. You can see the documentation for it. I'm not going to walk you through what stress test is all about, but the interesting thing over here is that it creates another key space over here called where is it? Key space 1. It has some funny tables over in here, and it creates its own key space. So your stress test is not going to affect your existing key space. It creates its own key space to do all these tests. This is the behavior of Cassandra's test out of the box, but you can also configure Cassandra's stress to actually inject data for your own key space, for your own, with your own tables, with your own data. You can configure and do all that. The default behavior is not so, because imagine if I'm a company developing a product, I don't know what key space you use, I don't know what tables you'll use. So they created their own key space, and then they just check if the configuration is done correctly. And next comes dev center. Dev center is nothing but Eclipse, with some nice plugins. So here I say I give a name, I say connect to these particular hosts, because I have the 3 nodes running on 3 different IP addresses. So I want to actually say connect to these nodes. If you have 10 nodes, you can put all the 10 numbers over here. Otherwise, you can just put one node, the one node that you know about, because imagine, I know that, for example, Apple has got a Cassandra cluster with 75,000 nodes. Are you going to put 75,000 numbers over here? Obviously not. So what you do is you put 1 or 2 nodes that you know, and then the nodes talk with each other using Apache's gossip protocol, and then over time it will discover information about the remaining nodes in that particular cluster, and that will eventually get popular, it will be written into a client configuration file, and then the client will be able to discover it over time. But initially you don't need to know all of that. So it's just that's just a connection configuration screen where I configure the connection, and then here on the right hand side you can see all my tables, and then you can see the result. I'm just running a query. No more questions? Can I go on?